Welcome, everybody. So great to see you all. And thank you for attending this very special lunchtime inspo with Rebekah Campbell, a highly anticipated event. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land in which we meet today. And for me, that's the Dja people in the Maston Ranges. And for Annie Le Cavalier, it is the peoples of the Kulin Nation, based on the fact that she's in where we would be today, she's in our Melbourne hub, 710 Collins Street. So welcome everyone. This is a Stone and Chalk event. It's a pivot event powered by Launch Vic, but I'm going to give you a little bit of an understanding of Stone and Chalk for those of you who are perhaps new to a pivot event and haven't actually attended anything that has been hosted by Stone and Chalk. So Stone and Chalk, we're Australia's leading impact network for emerging technologies. We're working closely with AusCyber, and we've curated a community of 400 plus startups and scale-ups in sectors that originally commenced in fintech, but we've grown to cybersecurity, AI, prop tech, reg tech, ag tech, space tech. There's a fantastic event, a space tech festival in Adelaide at the moment, for example, and beyond. We are a not-for-profit, and the idea of the organisation is to identify, nurture, connect and propel those who are looking to actually do extraordinary things, both social and business. My name's Abby Place. I'm responsible for the event program as part of Pivot, and I work closely with my general manager who's facilitating this session, Annie Le Cavalier. Annie will be talking a little bit further about her role, but we work with 60 growth startups and scale-ups, and we provide them with 5 pillars of support. Basically, we look at capital, we look at their customers, the expertise, so collaboration is vitally important to us, and talent. Today, the event you're at is actually part of the Pivot program, and Pivot is funded by Launch Vic, and it's about building a pipeline of talent for our high growth startup sector. And it's really trying to provide some education, mentoring and support for people in the corporate sector to actually identify the amazing opportunities that startups present. So we have a Start Smart Academy. We have this great mentoring program called Connect. We've got a series of events and workshops like this one, and we've also got a jobs platform. We have a really exciting conversation to be had. Annie will be facilitating the conversation. And we're truly delighted to have Rebekah Campbell here. I'm halfway through her book. Highly recommend reading it. It is absolutely gripping and a wonderful read. So I will now hand over to Annie and Rebekah for a wonderful lunchtime inspiration. Thanks, Annie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Abby. Hello, welcome everybody. This is an exciting and highly anticipated event. We were hoping to do it in person. In fact, this has been put off 3 times now. Rebekah is still stuck in New Zealand. What a treat that you're in for today. We're very lucky to have Rebekah here. Now, for those of you who may not know, Rebekah is an entrepreneur, thinker, activist, and author. She started her career managing bands, then did a major pivot and ventured into emerging tech, which led her to co-founding Hey You, a popular app that most of you will probably already be familiar with. It's used regularly by over 1 million Australians to order and pay at cafes and restaurants. Her ambition took her all over the world, where she managed to secure significant funding for her ventures, $17 million, with VCs and angel investors. Her passion, openness to learn from others, and creative ambition has led to her success in startup land. She has kept a blog about her experiences as an entrepreneur, which was named Best Business Blog by Smart Company, and which then became a New York Times column. Rebekah writes a monthly opinion piece for AFR Boss magazine and regularly contributes to heaps of media outlets. She also extensively consults to founders, businesses, governments, and was recently the host and curator of City of Sydney's virtual Reboot series, supporting 18,000 Sydney business owners to recover from the impact of COVID. And now Rebekah is a published author. Her book, 138 Dates, The True Story of One Woman's Search for Everything, is a candid and relatable depiction of her managing fierce ambition with crushing loneliness. Rebekah, thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be here. Unfortunately, not in Melbourne, but it's great to be chatting with you.
That's right. So how are you going across the ditch? How are you surviving lockdown in New Zealand?
We're in Wellington, actually. So we were in lockdown for 2 weeks, but we have come out. They've managed to contain the spread in Auckland, and it's looking pretty contained now. But everybody outside of Auckland is still restricted, but schools are back, and so we're happy.
Excellent. We're really thrilled to have you here today virtually with us, and can't wait to be doing this in person again as well. So Rebekah, you wrote a book, 138 Dates. I absolutely love this book. I can't remember powering through a book so quickly. It's incredibly vulnerable, raw, insightful, and funny. What a wild ride. Did you set out to write a book about finding love? Was this one of the bucket list items on one of your bucket list items?
No, I think when I was little, I was really into writing, and I did dream about writing a novel. I got all these half-started novels from when I was like, I don't know, 10 or 12 or 13 years old. And then I just didn't continue with it. And then when I started my first tech business, it was back in 2010. So it was pretty early in the kind of tech ecosystem. And I was out raising money from the very first kind of angel investor groups, and nobody knew anything, and I was learning so much. I started writing a blog, and so I just thought, and I was thinking to myself, oh, this week I figured this one thing out, and I thought maybe it would be useful if I started writing that down and sharing it with others. So I started a blog, and that got picked up by Startup Smart, which was also then pretty new, and then it just grew and grew. I worked out pretty quickly that kind of more vulnerable I was, and the more personal I was about my experiences, the more people would relate to it and share it. I could see it in the numbers. And so I started focusing on the kind of personal side of starting and building a business. And it just became quite huge. And the New York Times picked it up as a column. And then I got asked to write a business book based on the column. So I started writing this. It's a long answer to your question. And then at the time, I had found love, and I had a young baby, and I was so incredibly happy. And I had been on this massive mission to find a partner whilst I was building the tech company. And I just thought that the business book was boring, to be honest. I was a bit flat when I was writing it. And I thought the world doesn't necessarily need another person grumbling about women in tech, even though there's nothing wrong with it. There's a lot of challenges for women in tech, but I didn't feel like this was my calling. And the thing that was the hardest for me was finding personal happiness in amongst, as you put it really nicely before, this huge personal ambition. And so I decided to write that journey, intertwined with the business journey. I thought it would be a more interesting story and hopefully be more valuable for people.
Yeah, talk about taking risks and following your heart. That's amazing. Can you outline the parameters for us? So you set yourself the task of going on a date a week for a year, is that right?
Yeah, it started when I was 34, and I hadn't been on a single date in 10 years because tragically, my first partner was killed in an accident, and that really set me back. And then I just focused on business and work, and I guess as a coping mechanism. But then I built a bit of a profile, and I was embarrassed to put myself on the internet, and I just got to the point where I was completely stuck. And I woke up on Christmas morning at 34 years old in the garage of some friends of my parents, having another kind of random sad Christmas. And I just thought, this is not how my life is supposed to go. I wanted to have a family and kids running around. And so that was when I was like, I have managed to be successful at building these businesses. And so there's some things that I have learned that I know that I'm good at, and one of them is sticking at goals. So I'm like super goal orientated, and I know that when I set myself a goal, I'll stick to it. And so at the beginning, it was at the beginning of 2012, I was like, I'm going to go on one date every week for a year and just see what happens. And that was the beginning of a 3-year completely kind of transformational journey to finding happiness.
So it was all about finding a life partner.
Yeah, I didn't want to have a family, but it was more about, I wanted love. And I was pretty lonely. I was very focused on building this business, and I was traveling all around the world and raising capital and things. But I was all on my own all the time. And I didn't want that to be my future forever. I pictured this old lady in a nursing home, looking back and looking at all the others, people in the nursing home who had children coming to visits and partners and family who loved them, and I would still be all on my own feeling exactly the same. I didn't want that. I wanted for that woman who was in the nursing home to be able to look at the woman that I was then and go, okay, she gave it everything she had. She gave it a shot, a really good shot.
And spoiler alert, you did find a husband, but it took longer than you'd forecast.
Yes, it was a lot more challenge. I think this is the entrepreneur in me. I'm naturally extremely optimistic. And so I thought, which I think you have to be to start a business, and you also have to be to go on this crazy journey of going on 1 date a week. So I did think, okay, 1 out of 52 has got to be the one, and I'll have to get there. But there was so much I had to learn and about myself, about dating, and it was really like it's half and half, finding the right person and becoming the right person. So that was a journey for me that took 3 years.
And did you ever think about giving up along the way?
You know, I never did, actually. I think that's also the entrepreneur thing. I thought about giving up on my business either. Actually, no, there were times I thought about giving up on the business, but I didn't. I didn't think about giving up on it because I just pictured myself as this older person, like I said before, and I had to be able to say to that person, this was so important to me. I had to be able to say that I gave it everything. And I also did a simple value equation, which was I put all this effort into building my business and my work life. And yes, that does add value to my life. If it comes off, that adds a significant amount of value. But if I find love and I build a family, you know, that is going to add, in terms of like value add to my overall experience of life on the planet, it's going to add so much more. Yeah, and it's also an economic impact, a health impact. There's so many impacts of finding the right person. I was willing to really commit time and energy into doing it right.
Yes, I'm seeing a few parallels here with starting a new venture and looking for a husband. You think it's only going to take a year to find product market fit, ends up taking you 3. So Rebekah, I've asked you to, and you've kindly offered to read us a passage from your book. I think the audience will love this. It's just such an engaging book. Yeah, over to you to read us a little passage.
The book is written like a novel. It's not written, but there's a one part kind of very early on. So there's a kind of prologue. And then I go into like normal current voice talking about what I'm doing. So I'll read that. It's only 2 pages long, but it will give you a sense of what the book's like. Okay, so it's a bit of a story first, and then it says, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't she date for 10 years? How did a successful, intelligent woman get herself into such a pathetic ball of stuck? If you'd asked me this back in 2012, I would have given you a list of excuses. I'm too busy with my career. There's no decent single men in Sydney. I still love my first perfect boyfriend, and no one else will ever measure up. I never would have admitted that actually I was just scared, embarrassed to put myself on the internet, afraid of being rejected. I'm writing to you now from July 2020. For 8 years, I've published blog posts and newspaper columns about startup businesses and women in tech. And every time I started penning an article about venture capital or how to nail a sales presentation, I felt my fingers quiver at the keyboard because I had another story to tell. Because to me, career success seemed an inch tall compared with what really mattered. I tell the story expecting that I'll be criticized. People might say that a woman who claims to be a feminist shouldn't admit that her top priority is to find a man. I would disagree. I think women should voice what they want in life without fear of judgment. I wanted to build a business, yes. But when I lay in bed in the still of night, love is what I ached for. I wanted a partner. I wanted a family. I'm writing this book for me, age 35. I would have handed it to myself past the pile of dating advice books like Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man, and Why Men Love Bitches. Past the newspaper article where the male fertility doctor says women over 35 should stop being so fussy, and past reruns of The Bachelorette on Hulu. I would have handed this book to myself and said, listen, this is what it's actually like. This is what it will take to unravel yourself and to let go of everything that's standing in the way. This isn't a tale of salacious sexual encounters or jabs at weird men from internet dating sites, although there are a few. I've written this book to be useful, to provide insights, and to tell a story. And just in case there's anyone out there who felt like I did, to show that you are not alone. You are not the only one. As I picture that woman pacing about the grass, deciding to have sex when she clearly isn't ready, I want to wrap her in a blanket and kiss her forehead. And I want to scream in her ear. She's about to make an awful mistake. One of a huge pile of awful mistakes on her journey of 138 dates. I wish I could tell her she'll be okay, that Matthew will be forgiving, that the rest of this adventure will be easy and fun, and that every other man she's about to meet will be kind and genuine and safe. I wish I didn't know that she's about to get humiliated and hurt, like someone squeezed her heart dry and tossed it onto a dirty railway track, ready to be torn up again and again. But I'd still tell her to go for it, because she has no idea what's out there at the end, because what she'll find is so much more than she imagined. I tell her to go for it with 2 feet and a giant leap, because what she'll find is...
Cliffhanger. So I guess everyone will need to jump online right now and order the book to find out what happens next. And thanks so much for sharing that. It's just so engaging, and I'm sure it's just going to help so many people out there. I love how you've structured it also as a series of lessons. I've been in a relationship for 12 years, so I'm a bit naive, which is why I'm finding this such a refreshing read. Sounds like an absolute jungle out there, Rebekah. Can you give us the lowdown? Some of the worst dates you've been on, maybe the most bizarre date, and any broken hearts?
I say that it's not just a book about dating, right? That kind of passage
Absolutely
sound like it is, but the business story is very much woven into it. There's a lot of capital raising. The founders of Canva, you know, they're significant characters as we travel together on this crazy journey of raising capital. But yes, back to your question, there was some crazy, it's not about weird and funny dates. I'm sure that other people have written those books. It's really a personal story about growth. But yeah, there was one stalker. There was some rejection, which was really hard in the early stages of, I think that's parallel to capital raising, but personal rejection is much harder than someone saying no, because then they're saying no to your pitch deck or to your business idea. That's that one step removed from saying no to you as a person. So I think that was probably the hardest thing early on. I remember a great date that I went on, and I was so excited, and we kissed on the step of my apartment, and he said, "I'll call you tomorrow," and then I never heard from him again. And I sat there staring at my phone for 3 days, sending way too many text messages, thinking that he must have lost his phone. And I went to see a therapist, and my therapist is also, her advice is throughout the book. She told me to think of yourself like a product, and that he just wasn't the right buyer. And she just said, you need to find the right buyer. Like, he's just not buying what you're selling. So you don't need to change yourself, and there's nothing wrong with you as the product. It's just that he's looking for something else. And so it's really just a numbers game. Keep going till you find the right.
Excellent. Yeah. So I'd really love to shift gears now and move into, as you said, the kind of business aspects and the capital raising side of things, which is the really interesting backstory to all of this throughout the book. So yeah, this is really a full circle moment for me. Almost 12 years ago, I had launched a very popular talk series at the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney. It was pre-TEDx days, and it featured talks from the most innovative young people on the coal face of innovation, sharing their personal stories to a sold-out audience. And you were one of our first guest speakers. So I'll never forget how inspired I was by your talk. You were so young and had already accomplished so much, Rebekah. I was really impressed by your drive and ambition. And here you are 12 years later. Can you tell us a bit about your first business venture? It was in the music industry, is that right?
Sure, yeah. When I was at university, I was in Wellington actually, and Wellington had the highest youth suicide rate in the world at that time. And so I had this idea, which was to put on a concert for the university holidays, because I was like, I've got to find something to do with my crazy 3-month holiday. And so I thought I'll raise awareness of all the support organizations for young people. And so that started out as a small concert idea, and then someone gave me Neil Finn's home phone number. And so I called him up, who's the singer of Crowded House, who's like the biggest celebrity in New Zealand. And he actually answered the phone. And then we talked about youth mental health, and he said yes to playing at my concert. So it became a massive event with 15,000 people. And that was my first kind of experience of being like, I can actually, if I come up with an idea, I can actually pull it off. You just have to work. I just had to work really hard and not give up was the main lesson. If I kept going, it came together at the end. So I went to Sydney and worked for his manager. His manager offered me a job after the concert happened. And then the manager said, you should find a little band playing pubs and manage them so you can learn about the industry. Because I was just a, 21-year-old assistant or something at that stage. And I found this band called George, who were from Brisbane. And they were at that stage, I think they had a tiny bit of Triple J airplay and were playing, 50 people were turning up to their gigs. But they were amazing. And so I signed them up to be their manager. And then a year later, George became really successful. We had some big hits on Triple J, and I set up my own management company. So yeah, for about 8 years, I built one of the largest independent music companies in Australia. So I had George, we had Evermore, Matt Corby, Lisa Mitchell, Operator Please, Banshee, a bunch of artists. Yeah.
Incredible. And how did you pivot from a record label to an online reward platform? And that's a huge leap.
Yeah, it was very hard actually, because I got to like age 30 and I realized that I didn't want to go to gigs for the rest of my life. As fun as it was, I couldn't see myself going to the Big Day Out tour again, like, you know, in my 40s or something. And so I was like, I need to find something else to do. And I think the Social Network movie had just come out, and I was like, tech was really, everybody was excited about tech at that stage, but there wasn't much of an industry. But I think actually I saw Naomi Simpson being interviewed, who started Red Balloon, and that made me think, if she's not a tech engineer, she doesn't look like Mark Zuckerberg either, maybe I could do it. And so I had to get out of my music company, which was really hard because it was a personal management company. So I was effectively the key person in every contract. So it wasn't a business I could ever sell. It was like a really profitable, like fun business. But yeah, because of the nature of the business, it wasn't sellable. So I basically had to wind it up and then take this massive risk of going into an industry I knew nothing about. And my first idea was to build a platform that helped bands sell tickets. I raised a little bit of money for that. I put some of my own money into it. I spent way too much on like Indian developers and all these things that, you know, we know now is a bad idea, but we didn't know back then was a bad idea. But I was one of the guinea pigs that kind of figured all the stuff out.
And what year was that, Rebecca?
It's like 2010, I think, 2011.
Wow, yeah. I think that,
yeah,
that's actually when you were speaking at this event, was back then. Yeah. So you're setting up a company, and this, oh, sorry to cut you off, but I'll come back to this in a moment. So you're setting up a company, it's pre-Stone and Shock, support days. I can't imagine there were many accelerator programs around. It must have been tough. So yeah, can you talk us through some of those early day challenges?
Yeah, there was no accelerator programs. The lean startup had just come out, and that was like people talking about this idea of the lean startup. Some of the challenges, so I raised money from some angel investor groups, and really no one knew anything. Everybody had seen the Social Network movie, and that's the extent of people's general knowledge. So that's how the investors thought that the business was going to go. And then when we started hitting these kind of hurdles, it was like, hang on, this didn't happen in the movie. And so it was hard because people lost faith. The board tried to fire me as the CEO. And yeah, it was really hard. The way that I overcame it was I just kept going. And I did go to Silicon Valley, and I met Bill Tai. So that's actually a big part of the book. And I pitched, it was actually Rick Baker from Blackbird now who introduced me to, he was then at MLC, but we'd become friends, and he introduced me to a bunch of firms in Silicon Valley. And so I went and did a whole lot of meetings, and no one wanted to invest, but it was really incredibly eye-opening. And then I met Bill Tai, and he was like, got really excited. He invited me to Maui. Mel and Cliff from Canva were there. We were all trying to like pitch our ideas at the same time. And then that network really helped because Bill Tai came on board as an investor. He joined my board. Lars Rasmussen also joined my board and invested. And so there was some people with some like global tech experience, which was like a whole new level from the first lot of investors who were really, I'm just incredibly grateful for backing me at the beginning. But I think we all went into it without much knowledge.
And so what happened next after Posse? What was the leap to Hey You?
So Posse was about sharing recommendations for cafes and restaurants and other stores as well. And we would share who was recommending you with the store. And the idea was you could engage with people who were coming to your shop, your fans, and send them vouchers and things. And it was a really nice community, and it grew. We had, I think, 60,000 or something stores sign up to it around the world. So it scaled really nicely, but there was no revenue model, and there wasn't quite enough engagement to charge stores. There was like okay engagement, but it wasn't like people would use it when they were on holiday. So it wasn't like they were using it all the time. So it was hard to prove that we were driving new traffic to the shops, and it was hard to charge them. And so then I was like, we need a revenue model for this thing. And I don't think it's going to be just marketing, because that's going to be really hard because there's so many other platforms trying to sell marketing tools to shops. And so Beat the Queue, we're doing payments for cafes, and they were very small. They only had a handful of cafes, but they were extremely engaged. The customers were extremely engaged and they had a good revenue model. And so I was like, well, I know how to scale and you know how to make money. So let's come together. That was the kind of genesis of that idea of bringing the two businesses together.
What a union.
Yeah.
So clearly you're a serial entrepreneur. It's in your DNA. Can you tell us about some of the formative experiences that have shaped you?
I think I always had, there was one before, which was the concert when I was 19. That was extremely formative in terms of, it was the first time I recognized that I could pull things off. And then it opens your eyes to like, well, what could I do? Like, if you know that you can do things, or you just got, it's about hard work and keeping going. I think I was always entrepreneurial. So I was selling flowers at age 7 outside my parents' house. I collected golf balls and sold them back to the shop when I was 10 or 11. My friend had a pony, and so I would get her to get the pony, and we would go down to this kind of market on Saturday mornings and sell pony rides to kids for like $1. I would make heaps of money doing that. So I was always doing that kind of thing. And I think I just always thought I would do something entrepreneurial. I just didn't like the idea. I don't know. Another formative experience actually was so I discovered George whilst I was working at the management company, and then Sony Music came along and offered me a job as an A&R manager. And I was like, it was my kind of only experience with potentially working in a corporate. And I was so flattered because I was like, I don't know, I was 22, 23 or something. And it was like, I'd get a car and it was an A&R manager job, a fancy title and a business card. And I had to fill in the HR form as I was coming on board. And one of the questions was, what's your expected salary? And I was thinking, okay, I'm 23 or 22, whatever it was. This is like my 23rd year on the planet. How much am I willing to sell that for to Sony Music? And I was like, is it worth, because at the time I was earning 25 grand working at as in a management assistant at Grant Thomas Management. So I was like, I'm sure it's worth more than that. I'm sure they're going to pay me more than that. So I was like, is it worth 50 grand? I was like, no, it's worth way more than that. Is it worth 75? Is it worth 100? And I was like, am I willing to sell a year of my life for 100 grand? And I was like, no, 200 grand. And I couldn't come up with a number. And so I was just like, that was when I realized I'm not cut out to sell my time to a company. Like, I'm cut out to do my own thing. And that was a pivotal moment as well of thinking, okay, I've got to do my own business.
What a great story. And you talk about your your foot to the floor determination. Where does this fierce ambition come from?
I think it was from doing that event when I was 19. And then that was like realizing that I could pull things off. That was a transformative moment for me.
Do you come from an entrepreneurial family?
No, not at all. My dad is a teacher. My mum was also she was a uni lecturer. So not the kind of academic wonky, not at all entrepreneurial. But they were very supportive of me. My mum especially. I remember her saying when I went for the Sony job, she was not impressed. I thought she'd be really impressed. And she was just like, I always thought you were going to do your own thing. So I think that was like, she'd actually be a bit disappointed if I took this fancy job. I think that really
propelled you forward.
Yeah, propelled me forward as well.
And what drives you to keep innovating and creating?
I think I get bored doing anything else, really. I have done some jobs recently over the last few years where I've gone and done consulting stints, and they haven't gone that well. And I've done the job, I think, but I haven't felt like I've been at my best because it's not something that I'm super passionate about. How can I help you make 20% profits instead of this other percentage of profits? It's not something that's really, and I know that I'm not giving it everything, and so I'm not doing my best work. And that propels me to want to do my own thing, whether that be writing books or, creating something. I feel like when I'm really passionate about whatever I'm doing, that's when I do my best work. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to hearing a bit later on as well about what is next on the horizon for you. But before we get there, so from rock and roll to Silicon Valley, you've obviously worked with some remarkable people. Can you tell us about some of the lifelong friendships and mentors that have sustained you along the way?
Sure. Lars Rasmussen would be definitely one. So I met Lars at a Tech 23 conference in Sydney. And I remember someone said, I didn't know who he was, but I was struggling to manage these developers in India. And so it was very early. And someone said, you should meet that guy. And I just bowled up to him. I had to go. And I was like, someone told me I should meet you. I'm Rebekah from Posse, and this is what I'm doing. And would you have coffee with me? And then it wasn't until we actually had coffee I said, what do you do? And he said, I'm at work at Google. I've started Google Maps. And I was like, okay, that's great. and then he said, he went and interviewed how I was everybody who was working doing on my tech, and he said, I've never seen any startup have success doing it the way that you're doing it. And then he helped me recruit the right people. So that was a lifelong person, I think. And Cliff, but particularly Melanie Perkins, has been has been a friend for a long time since we met, which is our meeting is in the book, very early in her journey, and we both raised money at Mai Tai at the same time. And watching them, initially I was further ahead than them, and they were introduced to me as that I could help them with their presentations and things. But it was like after a few weeks I was like, wow, okay, I am learning more from you guys in this relationship than probably the other way around. Just, yeah, like she's an amazing person to watch. They're both they're an amazing team, which is one thing I have learned, is that if you can find that co-founding team, they're just such a perfect match for each other. They actually, when I did get into a relationship with a co-founder for Hey You, they would actually sat down with us and told us what's this kind of secrets behind making their co-founder relationship work, which I put that story in the book. But the thing about Melanie also is her just pure focus. She just is ruthlessly focused. And that's something I've always found challenging. Someone asks me to do something and I think, oh, that sounds like a good opportunity. Maybe something will come out of that. Whereas she would just say no to everything, even right at the very beginning. She just said she would have months where she said she wasn't doing any external meetings, which was like, she would meet her friends obviously, but she was so focused. And I think, and there's many other things as well, but that's one key thing I've learned from her.
And there's some great quotes in the book from Melanie. I don't have it in front of me, but yeah, I encourage everybody to read that book. There's some great advice in there. So we run a flagship mentor program here at Stone & Chalk for our founders. And we're also running a Pivot Connect program for top talent in industry looking to pivot their careers into startups, as Abby mentioned earlier on in the piece. I always like to say that mentors are the secret weapon of startups. Would you agree with this? And what important lessons have mentors imparted on you along the way?
There's so many things. One thing I have learned about mentors is, you've got to be careful who chooses mentors, and like friends or just people. They don't even have to be friends, just people that you know and you admire. Watching what they do can often give you better insights than you might get from someone who is a professional mentor. And I think also what I learned early on, I would go to these kind of older, generally men who had done it 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and they'd give me advice on everything, and they just often weren't the right people for lots of things. They might have been good for some things. And I learned that, one, you've got to like really trust yourself and your gut and grow confident in your own decision-making process, but also seek out people for different things. So like Lars, for example, has always been my go-to tech person. There's a man who works at Macquarie Bank who's been an incredible supporter of me from the very beginning, like early in my career. And he's just a really amazing leadership person. So he's the person I'll go to. A piece of advice I remember him giving me from a women's perspective, as when I had my male co-founder for the first time, I found that I would walk into meetings and that people would immediately look at him and kind of defer to him for questions and ask me to follow up with the notes and stuff. And I would just find this so frustrating because I'd been a sole founder for so long. I just wasn't used to it. And he would own the room, not deliberately, but just because people would look to him. And I remember saying to this mentor who I really look up to, whenever he walks in the room, everyone looks to him, and he owns the room, any room that he's in. And I was just like, how do you do that? I feel like now I used to own the room because it was always my meeting, but now I'm just like a second fiddle in someone else's meeting. I'm never really in charge of the meeting. And he said, Rebekah, you have to own the room. If you don't own the room, you won't get anywhere. And I thought that was like such great advice. He didn't tell me how to do it, but it was just like the next meeting I walked in and thought, okay, I'm just gonna, and I asked someone to move out of the seat they were in so I could sit it right at the head of the table. I opened the presentation and I got through, I got what I needed to out of that meeting. I had an agenda and I had things that I needed to get out of it, as opposed to sitting back and at the end of the meeting going, oh, I didn't really get what I wanted out of that meeting.
And so what are some tips for owning the room for people on the call that might want to have that?
Just do it. Like, there is no secret.
Just lean in.
It's clunky. Yeah, it was a meeting with Westpac Bank, I remember. There was like 12 people or so in this room, and we had been going round and round and round in circles about a bunch of things to do with how our partnership was going to work. And I was like, I now need this. Sorry, you just dropped off, Annie, in terms of your picture.
Sorry, I meant to mute that, not turn the video off.
I thought, moving around, I'm going to now take this advice and I'm going to own it. And so we sat down, and it started off like it normally did. and people deferred to my co-founder, and we were talking around in circles. And then I was like, oh, I just like to sit. I'm just going to move seats. And I said, would you mind swapping seats with me? And I took this seat and I said, I've got a presentation I'd like to go through. And then I had planned it all beforehand. I'd planned a agenda. I'd planned a, key questions that we want to get out of this meeting. And I put it up on my PowerPoint, and then I just led it. And it was clunky as anything. And I felt so awkward, but it worked, and I got what I needed to out of it. And I think the more that I've done that, the more I've become more natural. And I'm a very introverted person, so that does not come naturally to me at all, but you've got to do it.
Awesome. And do you yourself mentor other startups?
I've done some consulting for startups. I haven't done that much mentoring. I've done some over the years, but I have 2 young children at the moment. So I've been, very, I guess, busy with my children and putting a book out and, trying to run a business as well.
Yeah.
So.
Fair enough. I might hit you up still though after. We have a mentor program. As I mentioned, we'd absolutely love to have you on board as one of our mentors, time permitting, of course. So let's move into capital raising now. So raising capital is obviously one of the biggest obstacles to starting a new business. And there's lots of entrepreneurs on the call keen to hear about your capital raise journey. 17 million raised is quite an impressive feat. And no doubt there's been a lot of learnings for you along the way. Can you share some of those learnings and perhaps also some of the more obscure ones or the pitfalls that might not be so obvious?
Yeah, sure. There's so many learnings. There's different depending on who you're raising from, whether you're raising from a angel investor group or VCs. I think the key thing when I look at, I must have pitched, I don't know, like at least, I reckon I pitched 800 times or more. I don't know, like it was just so much pitching. Particularly in those early days, I pitched for probably a year and a half. And there were sometimes I was doing 8 meetings a day, just going from pitch to pitch. And everyone would give me a no and but you should meet this other person or these other people. And then they'd send off other introductions. And that was the entire way that I built my network, was pitching. I would always be, when I turned up, I would always be really enthusiastic and engaged in their questions, because I knew they were probably going to say no, because in the beginning, everybody said no, but I wanted them to like me enough to want to introduce me to their friends. So that was the key thing. And then, so they did introduce me to their friends, and often I stayed in contact with them. The key thing, looking back through all of those pitches and trying to evaluate, okay, I did 800 pitches. What are the ones that actually turned into something? What's the kind of differentiators? The key was personal relationship. So a lot of the people that ended up investing, it was not the first time that I'd pitched to them. It was not the first round I'd pitched to them on. So there were people who I had gone and pitched to early on. They'd said no, but meet my friend. And then I'd stayed in touch and I'd sent regular updates to them about our progress. And, I'd caught up with them for advice from time to time. And then those relationships grew. And eventually when the round came up again, they would be like, okay, I'll get in. I like you. And I can see you're making progress. And I want to be part of this. So it was all about relationship. And that was the same for VCs. So I pitched to Reinventure and the other firm that invested much earlier, as had Adam, who was running Beat the Queue. And they'd said no, but both of us had stayed in touch with them. And so they knew both of us, both of the firms knew both of us. And so when we were like, okay, we've joined forces now, and this is our plan, and we'd also could both show growth in what we'd been doing individually, then it made sense. So I think the key is building relationships. I always say, don't ask to get married on the first date. I think it is similar with capital raising. If you do, it's awkward turning up and doing a PowerPoint presentation and then asking for whatever, 100 grand or $5 million or whatever you were asking for. You want to be going in and having a conversation, and you want to be getting to know them as well over time before you raise capital. So if you're thinking of raising capital in 6 months or 12 months, I would be starting to build those relationships now.
Some great advice there. Is there any other advice you'd give to people looking to raise capital?
Be careful who you take money from as well. I think
that's a good one.
So, I just remember everyone telling me this, and I just thought, I remember thinking beggars can't be choosers, and I'm a beggar, because that was always the point that I was at. So be a beggar. That's an important thing. And the reason I was a beggar is because I raised money. I raised too much money too early, which was because nobody knew what they were doing. And I managed to raise $1.5 million with no minimum viable product or anything, just an idea and a nice PowerPoint presentation. It took me 1.5 years, but I pulled it off. But then I hired an engineering team from Google and who were amazing. But then the first version of the actual business model didn't work. So then I had to pivot to do something else to show that now I had this great team, but the model didn't work. But we had to show some progress so that we could raise the next round of capital so that I wouldn't lose all of the first round of capital, people's money, and have to let the team go. So I was in this constant churn of raising money, trying to pivot around to find a business idea that worked with this great team. And yeah, it was really hard, and it put me in a bad position to negotiate. So I raised money at very low valuations early on. So I got massively diluted, and I took on lots of investors' money who probably I shouldn't have taken on because they were not experienced enough in understanding the risks and time it takes to build a technology company. And then when you get larger investors as well, you want to be careful that you don't give people too much control. And yeah, very dilution. If I was building a company again, I'd be extremely dilution sensitive and very sensitive about who I brought into the business, because it really is. You need to, if you find yourself in a position where you think you're being a beggar and you can't choose, then go back to your business and work on it some more and try and get yourself into a position where you can be a chooser, because you'll find much better people. You have much more long-term success.
And speaking of some of those big backers, so as you mentioned, Westpac invested into HeyU via Reinventure, their corporate venture capital arm. Corporate partnership is obviously a whole other kettle of fish. How did you navigate this, and what lessons can you share with those looking to sell or partner with corporates?
I think corporates are really hard. I think Westpac did work quite well for us. I don't know, it did drive us a lot of customers, but it took a massive amount of effort on our part to make it happen. We had to integrate with their app. There was 1 million meetings that are really distracting. And one side of it worked well, which was the customer side, the kind of driving cafe growth. It did not work well at all. So I think Westpac is probably one of the better examples of something like this working. But I think that I had so many other examples. I won't say the names of the companies, but we invested a huge amount of time with one of the media companies, with another extremely large Australian corporate, and they both wanted to invest, and we got to term sheet stage, and we did pilots with the different opportunities with working within there to put our product into the ecosystem, to put it in front of customers. And you just waste so much time, and both of them fell over. And both times it almost killed our entire company because we'd spent months and months on these partnerships. I would be very wary of doing any large corporate partnerships. I would do, I think a good example is what I've done recently with my book, actually. So I met my husband on Tinder. And so I thought, Tinder, huge audience, like massive. And so I spent, ages trying to get hold of people at Tinder, thinking, this is going to be the great partnership. I'm going to tell the story about how you can find a husband on Tinder, and they're going to promote me to all of their audience, and this is going to be great. And then of course, and then I knew in the back of my mind, because I'd had this experience in startups of how these big corporates will mess you around. And that is what happened. And then I thought, well, what about RSVP? They're much smaller. Is anyone on RSVP anymore? I was thinking, I'm not sure, but they're I looked them up, and they were local. They were owned, they're not owned by Fairfax anymore. They're owned individually. So I just wrote to them on their website, and they've still got a really good database. They're not the biggest like Tinder, but they're still really active, and they're owned and operated by one person who can make decisions. And they just were a great partner. We ran this amazing series of web events together. I would look for partners which are not the biggest corporates. I would look for ones where you're dealing with someone who can make decisions, who's like an owner of the business, who has a vested interest in making it work, who's not just going to shuffle you around so that they can look like they're doing something in their job. So yeah, and that drove a massive amount of sales for me, as well as being a really great community partner.
Excellent. Yeah, some great advice there too. Rebekah, now we're going to talk about a little bit about talent, the other really important pillar to startup success, finding the right talent. This event is obviously part of our pivot programming. And as Abby mentioned, it's all about building a pipeline of talent into startups by helping people in corporates and industry and those legacy, big clunky organizations recognize the amazing opportunities that exist within startups. Now, getting the right people on your team as you build and grow a company, especially in the early days, is critical. What's been your secret sauce to finding the right talent, and how do you know when you found them?
So much to this is it's about finding the right people and having them being aligned with you. I was never that good at it, to be honest. I'm probably not the best person in terms of finding and motivating team members and managing team members well. I would look for people who were really passionate. I would look for like work ethic over experience and look that they wanted to learn. I think something that I have learned like later in my career is there's that whole like fire fast thing in startup world where they say hire slow, fire fast. I don't think that's necessarily right all the time. I think hire slow, but I think at some point you've got to commit to people. And you can, when I've seen so many startups, and I've done this myself, when someone isn't quite at the same, level as you are in a particular, like in terms of effort, thinking, this isn't the right person, I'm going to find someone else who's everything's going to be better. And that's just not the case. I think this is a key message in my book about romantic relationships, but I think it's the same, particularly in business partnerships, is that once you choose and you make it work, you choose the person unless there's like a deal breaker, you will be more, if you're committed and loyal to people that work for you or that are in partnership with you, you'll end up, I think, much more successful business than churning through loads of people. It doesn't mean to say you shouldn't fire someone if they're really bad, but I'm just saying, like, you really show loyalty and you'll get it back.
I suppose if you are hiring with that passion, work ethic, and openness to learning, you can, I guess it's about, pulling the right levers to get the best out of those people. And as you said, making it work. Now, fitting in hasn't always come easy for you. I'm basing this on some references in your book. And you did mention that you're an introvert. What advice do you have for people who perhaps feel out of their depth, unsure, looking to crack into the startup scene, for example, but who perhaps lack the connections and experience to fit in and gel?
You just find like what you are good at, I think. So I am terrible in a group situation. So I would go to these networking events and I'd mill around in the background and feel really awkward and not know how to break into conversations and worry that everybody would notice that I was standing on my own looking a loser because I didn't have anyone to talk to. So I just could never pull off those things. And so I was like, one day I thought, I'm just not going to go to those things anymore. And so I know that I am really good one-on-one. And so I will try and get introduced to someone and then I will go and sit with them somewhere quiet because I don't have a loud voice. I'm usually in a coffee shop or in their office, and I know I'm really good at building connection one-on-one. And so that's what I do. And then I like try and build connections with people who are really good, who are really extroverted and have good networks. And I can think of probably three amazing networkers, extroverted people who have become very close friends and mentors of mine. And I know I can get to anyone in Australia through those people. So I don't need to go out and network and build my own like massive network. I've got a very small number of very deep connections. And through that, I can get to who I need to get to.
Excellent. B2B model. Love it. And so obviously the opportunities in startups are so diverse. How would you convince somebody from, and this is what the pivot program is all about, how would you convince somebody from corporate, government, or legacy industries to make the leap and join the startup rebellion?
I think you've just got to look in your heart and see if you're passionate about it. I always think of myself as an old person, like I said before about the looking for love. And I did imagine myself age 80 looking back on my life. And if I had an idea and I hadn't gone for it, or I hadn't tried something, I would really regret it. And I tried to live with this kind of regret minimization strategy. So, if you try it and it doesn't work out, you might regret it a little bit. If you try it and it's successful, then you'll obviously not regret it at all. But if you never try it, you'll never know, and you'll probably regret it massively. So I think that's quite a good way to make.
Excellent. Now we've only got about 3 minutes to go, and I would like to see if there's any questions on the floor, but perhaps before we open it up to the floor, but feel free to post your questions in the chat for anyone on the line who'd like to ask some questions. Can you tell us, Rebekah, clearly you're a machine. Has COVID slowed you down? What is next for Rebekah Campbell?
So COVID was, I was running, so I was doing a whole lot of consulting and face-to-face training, and I had this kind of whole network of face-to-face people who were working at high growth companies who were training. So that was like a great little business that I'd started while I had very young children or baby. But when COVID hit, that all stopped. And I had always wanted to write this book, and I'd been pottering away with it in the background, and I was never really able to focus on it. So I was just like, I'm going to write this book. And I did a deal with my husband during that first lockdown period where I would get to write 5 hours in the morning from like 7 till 12, and then he would get to work, he would look after the kids, and then from 12 onwards he would work until he finished. And so I had 5 hours every day where I was just sitting at my desk in my bedroom upstairs, and I couldn't even go downstairs because the kids would come running around my feet. So I just had to focus, and that was the best thing for me in terms of I actually got the book written. And then the publisher deal came together very quickly at the end of last year. So I guess in that regard, it hasn't slowed me down. And I managed to do what I actually was always passionate about, which was writing. And I look back to childhood, it was what I always wanted to do. So at the moment, I am working on another book. I can't say what it's about because it's not about me, but yeah, I'm super excited.
Is it a business book? You
can't
say.
Not exactly. I can't really say right now, but I've got actually 3 ideas for books that I've been working on simultaneously. One of those is taking a kind of forward, like one of them looks like this is going to be the one, but that's what I'm doing now.
Excellent. There is one question here, which is, how do you start doing the do with lots of ideas? And I interpret this to be like, if you've got, like you, just lots of ideas, inspiration, how do you start narrowing down and focusing in on what's, I guess, worth doing? Unless you read that question differently, but that was my interpretation.
It's hard I still find it hard to focus because I still want to do lots of things. Like I really want to get on with another book, and I also really want to promote this book, and I'm doing some consulting to make some money, and it's so many things that, and I've got kids. And so it's hard to focus. So I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that question, but I try and just set myself one thing at the beginning of every week and be like, I'm going to get this one thing done this week. Otherwise I spend all my days doing the important and urgent things and never do the kind of important and non-urgent things. And so I just have to go, okay, this is important and not urgent. And this week I'm going to get this thing done. And I will just that will make me ruthlessly prioritize it. And I'll try and do it, whatever it is, I'll work on that thing first in the morning so that I get it done by the end of the week. That seems to work for me.
Yes, great reminder. Important, not urgent. There is another question here as well. Just maybe last question before we wrap it up. Did your startup journey success have deviations from typical startup process? Sure, especially in the early days. So there would have been many. I don't know if there's I
know what a typical startup process is. We didn't have a strong foundation. I think that's the big difference between when I look at my journey and Mel's journey. She had an extremely strong foundation, and this was the problem she was going to solve. And this is what she wanted the company to look like. And whereas I was like, I want to start a tech company. And then I had an idea and I tried it, it didn't work. And then I raised some money and then I had to pivot. And I was like, okay, what's the idea? And I was looking for an idea. That's not a good approach, is you've got to have a burning passion and get really good at that one thing. I think also, there's a lot to be said for just looking at what are you most deeply passionate about. This is probably a good thing to end on is, one thing I wish I'd done differently is spent more time figuring out what am I really passionate about and solving that problem, as opposed to trying to find a business problem and then solving it in order to create a business. Because I did I built Hey You and it was successful and profitable. But there was a point where I was like, I've got a baby now, and how much do I care about people paying for coffee and drinks? Like, how much is this really the very best use of my time? I'm putting so much energy into this thing, and I could be spending that with my baby, or I could be doing something else. And so I did leave that business, and it's now running with the CEO, and it's great. But I think when I look at other friends who have stuck with the one thing, it was like they were so passionate about that one problem that they're willing to give it 20 years. They're put their life to that problem. So I think be really careful what you give your life to. So once you start a company, you want to be waking up in 5 or 10 years time just as passionate about that problem. as you were on day one.
Look, what a great way to end. Thank you so much, Rebekah. Your passion clearly shines through, and it's been a really refreshing conversation. And thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. Now, to people on the line who might want to know how to get your book, it is in the chat, but you can order a copy through Booktopia. You've also will be releasing the Audible version, so you can pre-order the recorded. Rebekah's actually doing the narrating the entire book, correct? And you can download the first 4 chapters of her book on her website. So also in the chat, I believe you also have a growth marketing class coming up in a couple of weeks. So hopefully that has been posted in the chat as well. We'll put that out through our community, our Stone and Chalk community as well. I'm sure there'll be lots of people interested in that. Rebekah, thank you so much for giving up your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. We wish you all the best in all of your future endeavors, and really looking forward to continuing to follow your journey over the coming years, decades, etc. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Annie, and thanks, Abby, as well, and the whole team at Stone and Chalk, and hopefully we'll get to come over and see you all in person sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Thank you.
Bye.